The rain that fell over London, you see, wasn't quite like the storms in Rome. No, it was quieter, colder. It whispered instead of roared. For Robert Thorn, it felt rather like a fresh start, a cleansing of the past, perhaps. The call had come rather suddenly. A promotion, they said. Robert was to be the United States ambassador to the United Kingdom, a prestigious post, a step into history, indeed. Katherine was, of course, thrilled. The black corridors of Rome, the ghostly corridors of the Vatican Hospital, they would be nothing but memory now. They packed up their lives and crossed the sea, chasing the illusion of peace they were. The Thorn residence in England was the kind of home whispered about in high society. Ancient stone walls wrapped in ivy, iron gates tall as trees, and gardens that stretched like forgotten dreams across the hills. It stood as a monument to wealth and power, and behind its doors, the Thorn family settled into a rhythm of quiet privilege. Damien, now 5 years old, seemed the very picture of health. He did. His hair was dark, his skin pale but flawless, and his eyes, those strange, knowing eyes, seemed older than his years. He rarely misbehaved, rarely raised his voice. There was something oddly disciplined about him, as though he knew he was always being watched, and approved of it. To outsiders, he was perfect, charming, polite. But inside the house, the silence was beginning to change. It started small. The family took Damien to the London Zoo one weekend. It was a grey morning. Fog clung to the trees like cobwebs. They visited the monkey enclosure, an open-air space surrounded by low walls and metal rails. As they approached, Damien grew quiet. He stared at the monkeys as they swung between branches and chattered at one another. Then, as if struck by a collective panic, the monkeys went wild. They screamed. They clawed at the walls. They scrambled to the farthest corners of the enclosure, as though trying to escape something unseen. Mothers clutched their babies and shrieked. One older male began slamming his body into the fence, eyes rolled back in terror. Damien stood perfectly still, watching. Katherine grabbed him, heart pounding. She didn't speak of it later. She didn't know how to. A week later, they went riding in the countryside. A local stable had offered Damien a pony. The trainer, a soft-spoken woman in a red coat, brought the animal out. But the moment Damien approached, the pony reared back in panic. It screamed, a horrible human-like cry, and bolted. The trainer was thrown against a fence, her arm snapping like a twig. Damien watched with his usual calm expression, while others screamed and ran to help. Robert dismissed it as bad luck. Katherine said nothing, but she didn't sleep that night. There was a church on the edge of the Thorn estate, a centuries-old stone chapel with moss on its steeple and cracked stained glass. One Sunday, Katherine suggested they attend Mass. She missed the sense of community, the old songs, the weight of tradition. Robert agreed. They dressed Damien in a little velvet suit. He looked angelic, like something from a painting. But as they neared the chapel, the air seemed to shift. Wind picked up through the trees, bending branches like they were bowing. The car rolled to a stop outside the chapel, and Robert turned to unbuckle Damien from the back seat. That's when the screaming began. It wasn't loud at first, just a soft whimper, then a whine. But it grew into something unearthly. Damien kicked and thrashed in his seat, clawing at the window, his face twisted with sheer, primal terror. Katherine tried to calm him, but his eyes were wide with horror, locked on the church's looming cross. "Please, Robert," she gasped, as Damien's shrieks filled the car. "We can't force him." Robert looked at the church, then at his son, his adopted son, and made the choice. They drove away. Damien's cries stopped the moment the church disappeared from view. He sat quietly, smiling, as though nothing had happened. It was the kind of morning that seemed too perfect to go wrong. The sky was clear over the Thorn estate, its vast lawn trimmed like a royal garden, and bright streamers fluttered in the breeze. Children in little suits and dresses laughed among tables filled with cake, lemonade, and shining toys. A small pony trotted around a ring, carrying giggling guests. A clown juggled near the fountain, red nose bobbing in time with the soft music playing through hidden speakers. Damien Thorn had turned 5. Robert Thorn watched his son from the patio with a glass of brandy in hand. The boy was riding the carousel that had been rented for the afternoon, his dark hair fluttering as he moved in slow, controlled circles. Katherine, radiant in a cream dress, smiled as she moved from guest to guest, her eyes always drifting back to her son. Everything was perfect on the surface, but beneath the cheer, there was something off. The air felt a little heavier. The shadows fell a little longer than they should have on such a bright day. And somewhere nearby, unseen by the crowd, the dog was watching again. In the upstairs window of the estate, Holly, Damien's nanny, stood behind the glass, her face pale and unreadable. She'd been quiet all morning, moving through the house like a ghost. Her eyes were red, as if she hadn't slept. In her hand, she clutched a length of rope. The Rottweiler was in the garden below. How it had gotten past the estate's gates, no one knew. But there it stood now, massive and motionless, staring directly up at the window where Holly watched. She smiled. Down below, the clown finished a trick to a burst of applause, and the children clapped with sticky hands. Robert glanced at his watch, checking the time before scanning the crowd. "Where's Holly?" Katherine asked, balancing a plate of cake. Robert shrugged, probably upstairs changing. And then a voice, high and strange, rose above the noise. "Damien! Damien! Look at me! It's all for you, Damien!" Heads turned. The clown froze. Katherine dropped the plate. Everyone looked up. There, standing on the edge of the manor's third-floor window ledge, was Holly. Her arms spread wide, rope tied around her neck, the end fastened to the building's support beam. "It's all for you," she cried again, a tear slipping down her cheek. And then she stepped off the ledge. The sound of the rope snapping taut was louder than thunder. Her body swung violently against the stone wall, her dress flying up, her death peen crashing into the side of the house before hanging lifeless in full view of the children below. Screams erupted. Mothers clutched their kids. A few guests vomited. Robert stood frozen, and Katherine collapsed to her knees, hands covering her mouth. And Damien? He simply stood there, looking up at her body, silent, unmoved. The police came, of course. They asked questions, took statements. The body was removed, the children sent home, the cake left untouched. Robert and Katherine were rattled. She cried for hours. He drank for hours. Neither could explain it. Holly had shown no signs, no letters, no strange behavior. And yet she had looked so sure of what she was doing, as if she truly believed she was giving Damien a gift. That night, Robert walked the halls of the house, staring into the nursery where Damien slept. The boy looked peaceful, angelic even. But Robert can't shake the image of Holly's body swinging in the air like a grotesque puppet. He turned to leave, but paused at the doorway. The dog was there again, not outside, but in the house, standing at the end of the hallway. Its black fur seemed to absorb the light. Its yellow eyes glowed faintly in the dark. Then it vanished, as if it had never been there at all. 3 days after the birthday party ended in horror, the Thorn household was still reeling. The estate had turned quiet, too quiet. No music drifted through the halls. No laughter echoed across the marble floors. The carousel had long since been dismantled. The swing set sat untouched. Even the birds in the trees seemed to have fled. Katherine had begun pulling away. She barely spoke. Her hands trembled when she poured her tea, and her eyes rarely met Robert's. But Damien was unchanged.